You're listening to an archived Cabral Concept podcast. After listening to this show, check out the most up-to-date podcasts available at stephencabral.com/podcasts or search directly on iTunes. And now, welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
We will be talking about how to decrease bloating, burping, gas, constipation, loose stool, acid reflux, and so much more. One of the reasons why I love doing the podcast and really love doing these episodes is that they're always morphing. They're always hopefully trying to become a little bit better for you and our community. And so what we've really decided for 2020 is that we are going to theme each month. Now, not every podcast is on a particular theme, but once a week, it will be on a particular topic related to taking your knowledge far more in depth. So last month was Heart Health Month, and I did about 5 episodes and some research dedicated to making sure that you are not a victim of the number one cause of death really in the world, and that is cardiovascular-based disease, heart attacks, etc. So why that's important to me is that if we could just eradicate that one thing, well, people would be so much healthier and they would live longer, stronger lives. So this month, what we want to do, and of course, teaming up with Equilibrium Nutrition, what we're talking about is digestive health and gut health this month. That means I'm going to be explaining today what happens and why your stomach starts to feel bloated, especially after eating, why you might get burping or belching or gas. Like, we're going to go over those specific things. Sometimes, not a lot of people like to talk about them, but that doesn't mean that a lot of people aren't suffering from these particular issues. Most likely, at least one person that you know, maybe yourself, that we should share this information with. And then, next week, I'll be going over the 4 main causes of digestive and gut health issues, and that's inside the intestines and the stomach. So that'll be really important to look at that. And then, of course, we'll go on from there over the next couple of weeks. So excited, though, for today's show. Today leads the way with something that it was by popular request. Our health coaches wanted an episode for all of our health coaching clients on how to improve stomach and digestive-based strength. So today's podcast is going to be dedicated to that. And without further ado, let's dive right into it. So one of the reasons why people get bloating, especially within 30 minutes of eating. This is different, okay? It's different than 3 hours later. If you get bloating or burping within about 30 minutes of eating, and it could continue on after that, but within about a half hour, it is oftentimes related to low stomach acid, also sometimes called low gastric acid. Now, the reason why it's called that is that first the food begins to move into the top of the stomach, which is called the fundus. And from there, after about 20, 30 minutes, it starts to move lower into the gastric part of the stomach. And the gastric part of the stomach produces gastric acid or hydrochloric acid. And that's what allows us specifically to break down heavier proteins. That's really, really important. It's why some people don't feel well after eating a heavy protein meal. And it's oftentimes why people begin to eliminate meat, not for social reasons, not for environmental reasons, etc., but they simply can't digest it anymore. So what I want to do is actually go over what's going on with the stomach and why this is happening, what are the main causes, and then how do we fix it. One other thing I'd like to mention is that we have a lot of people on stomach acid blockers right now that is causing so much long-term damage to their body. And I want to go over that in just a minute, what happens when you have low stomach acid. Now, many of these people, though, mistakenly are put on stomach acid blockers when really the issue is higher histamines, really the issue could be H. pylori, or really the issue could be low stomach acid. Believe it or not, low stomach acid can cause acid reflux. Here's the reason why. Here's probably what no one shared with you before, is because when you have low stomach acid, typically between a pH of 3 and 5, your stomach acid should be below a 3 or even a 5 plus, which is very, very low stomach acid. What happens is this. There's something called the lower esophageal sphincter, the LES. And it's what essentially separates the esophagus from the top of the stomach itself, where the fundus is just kind of right above that. And it stays open. The reason why it stays open is because its job is to close in the presence of high stomach acid. But if there isn't high stomach acid, or let's say there's too much stress, what happens is the stomach acid then, what little there is there, is able to come back up and it starts to burn, right? We get that indigestion or acid reflux. It starts to burn the esophagus, causing, personally or potentially in the future, Barrett's esophageal-based cancer and other issues. Now, keep in mind, just taking acid blockers themselves does not stop Barrett's esophageal-based cancer. So we just want to look into that, look into the research. What our goal should be is to figure out the underlying root-based causes. But just keep in mind, I just named a couple, and I'm going to get to those root causes, but when you have low stomach acid, you might be feeling these symptoms. You might be feeling a little bit nauseous. You might be feeling that acid reflux, the heartburn. You might be feeling like your skin is starting to look a little bit more dry or not quite as plump and rich. You might have more allergies, more asthma, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, parasite overgrowth, intestinal permeability like leaky gut. It can lead to issues such as osteoporosis, heartburn, which we talked about before, and potentially even thyroid issues, acne, all sorts of gastritis, inflammation essentially of the gastric part of the stomach, which we'll talk about, and anemia. Now you could say, well, how do all these things take place from low stomach acid? Well, here's the deal, that when we eat food, if we don't have enough stomach acid, we can't kill the bacteria that may be naturally present with a lot of these foods, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And there can even be parasites in some of the foods that you're eating. But if you have enough stomach acid, it kills those bacteria and it can kill those parasites as well. This is one of the reasons why when I went overseas, I made sure to use specific supplements just in case I was put in a position where I was eating food that I didn't know what type of bacteria was on it. Really, really important to remember that, and we'll go over that towards the end. And also just being careful. Like, for example, I would never eat meat that I didn't know from a restaurant, that I was at in particular. I broke that rule one time. Literally, I broke that rule one time at an airport, and I got so sick. Now, who knows? Was that to teach me a lesson? I don't know. But I was sick for the next 3 days, and that never happens. But I was exposed to bacteria. My body's simply not used to it. I had been up for probably like 30 hours on all sorts of different flights. Had no more food left. I was like exhausted, didn't want to continue to fast, had some food, and I got like just what looked absolutely delicious, this warm plate, all that. And then, of course, got sick. These things sometimes happen. So I learned my lesson. I want to share these lessons with you as well. But here's the thing, though. So our stomach acid helps to protect us from killing bacteria so that we don't end up as well with things like H. pylori, too. And we're going to talk about that's one of the reasons why you might have low stomach acid. But when you have allergies, when you have asthma, when you have autoimmune, when you have inflammatory-based issues, when you have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, what happens is you're allowing bacteria, you're allowing other things from the outside environment that should have been destroyed in your stomach acid in the gastric part of the stomach, right before it moves through that, or the pylorus, right before it moves through that pyloric valve, the very end of the stomach, that it's already been done with. It's already been dealt with. Your first line of defense killed that bacteria. It killed those parasites. So when things then enter your intestines, your body's assuming once it gets to the intestines that it's been cleansed, that it's been purified in the stomach. And now the intestines' job is not necessarily to continue to kill things or wipe things out. Its job is actually to absorb nutrients. So once it makes it to the intestines, especially that first part, which is called the duodenum, your body is hopefully then dropping bile. But again, the bile that's moving down to the first part of the small intestine, you only produce an adequate amount to match the amount of stomach acid that you're producing. So for example, if the pre-digested food that's moving through what's called that gastric valve or pyloric valve into the first part of your small intestine, if it is not acidic in nature, your body doesn't necessarily produce as much bile as it should to cool that acid, because bile is a pH somewhere around 8.8. And the food coming out, well, will ideally have a lower pH, maybe in the 3 to 5 range. So now we get this cooling bile, and it meets this acidic-based food chyme or chyme. And what it does from there is it begins to break open. So that is the biochemical reaction that happens when an acid and a base mix. So one of the best examples of this is, I love creating these little science experiments, especially with my young daughters, is, you just put in some vinegar, right? Some white vinegar inside of a little beaker. You can make a volcano out of it. You can put some clay around it. And then you just add baking soda, right? So the acid is that low pH, somewhere around a 3 or so for that vinegar. And then you're going to add in the baking soda, which has a high pH, 8+. Well, the chemical reaction creates those bubbles, that foam, and that is exactly what's happening in the first part of the small intestine as we begin to break down those fat-based molecules, continue to break down protein. And then from there, we have much smaller particles. Now, if that happens perfectly, there's nothing to cause fermentation, there's nothing to cause bloating. But that bile does something else that's very important. If we don't drop enough bile, the bile allows for the detoxification of the intestines, and especially the small intestine. So if we don't do that, we allow then for more bacteria to fester and grow, and that's also one of the ways that we can get small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So a lot of people that are on acid blockers, or many people that just have low stomach acid, and I'll get to the reasons in just a moment, can start to have digestive-based issues, not just in the stomach, but actually in the intestines. And since the intestines are about 26 feet long, not a very good thing, especially since that can lead to malnutrition. Because if there's not enough stomach acid, you're simply not going to be breaking down your proteins well enough. You're not going to be absorbing your calcium, magnesium, zinc, and B vitamins. Well, if we don't have those, here's what else happens. We can't make enough stomach acid. That's the problem, right? So it's a vicious cycle. If you don't have enough B vitamins, can't handle stress well enough, can't produce enough stomach acid. If you don't have enough zinc, same exact thing. One other thing that hurts people quite a bit as well is that there's a lot of people on low salt diets. Now, they might be on low salt diets because they're trying to control their high blood pressure, etc. Here's the problem. A low salt diet, low sodium, does not allow you to produce as much hydrogen chloride. Chloride also being half of sodium chloride, which is salt. Now, I don't recommend regular table salt, but Himalayan sea salt can be quite advantageous when it comes to actually making more stomach acid. It's one of those components, right? Hydrogen and chloride. Now, another big part of this as well is looking at how do we get low stomach acid in the first place, right? Because we know that this can be a huge issue. A few that I like to talk about is that when the body's been stressed for a very long period of time, it stays in what's called more of the sympathetic nervous system. Now, again, I go over this quite a bit, but it's still very, very important. It's called the fight or flight. And when you're in fight or flight, your body is not in a digestive-based mode. That means that in order for you to digest your food properly, produce enough stomach acid, produce enough enzymes, produce enough bile, and to get that peristaltic movement in the intestines, which means you can actually move the food down without it just sitting there fermenting and creating gas, your body needs to be relaxed, okay? So that's one of the main reasons we tell people sit while eating. Be mindful while eating. I have a podcast on mindful eating. If you haven't listened to that, I definitely recommend checking it out. It's relaxing, getting set in a mode that you can enjoy this food, that you can take a breath, that you can relax, so that you move yourself from the sympathetic nervous system dominance to the parasympathetic. You're going to be able to break down your food to a better degree. You're going to be able to absorb it to a better degree. And remember, that matters because what you eat and what you absorb becomes you. So if we want to really work on that aging process, we want to work on that dis-ease process, and for sure, body transformation, we want to make sure that we're sitting and that we're absorbing our food. Remember, if you're not absorbing your food, all you're getting are essentially empty calories. You're not getting all those micronutrients that you need, which tells your body you're hungry, you're hungry, you're hungry. You need more micronutrients because you're not absorbing them well enough. So you eat more calories, but you don't necessarily get all those micronutrients. So stress is a big one. Zinc deficiency, B vitamins we talked about. A lot of people eating too quickly or standing while eating. That's not going to help. Sit down while eating, rest for 20 minutes. You can do that. You can sit for 20 minutes, okay? Another one is we talked about the antacids people are taking, all the different prescription drugs that can start to hinder stomach acid production. A big part of it can be infections, okay? So people get an H. pylori infection. Very, very common. I'll be talking about it next week, so definitely tune in for that show. because more than essentially a third of the population is walking around with H. pylori infection, many people with parasites as well. All of those things can absolutely hinder stomach acid production, especially since H. pylori, the bacteria itself, steals your hydrogen. Okay, so really, really important to look at that. Food sensitivities are a big one as well, and also poor food combining. If you didn't check out my show before on food combining, head over to stevencabral.com/podcasts. It's most important for people with stomach acid issues and bloating issues, because if you have good stomach acid, if you have strong digestion, most people can kind of overcome it to a degree, or blending your food makes it much easier to digest. So food combining, let's see if I can find the show for you. And let's see, how to improve digestion and decrease bloating with meals. We talked a little bit about that. Well, I'll see if my team can link it up. Oh, there it is. It looks like it's episode 481. Shrink your stomach with these food combining principles. All right. And then episode 82. So episode 82 is my original show way back in the day. That was like the third month ever I had been doing podcasting. And I talked about my grandmother's old world method. So I'd love you to tune back to one of my oldest podcasts, episode 82. And then, of course, on episode 481, I did a review of that as well. Okay, so food combining is a big one that I wanted to bring to your attention. And the last couple would be just eating really too much processed food. Too much sugar is always one of those culprits. Now, people start to go lower in stomach acid as they age. Make no mistake about it, that does happen, okay? So I'm not going to say it doesn't happen. It absolutely does, which means we need a little bit more help, and we definitely need to be more mindful of our eating. That's a big one, too. And the last one I'll just say is this, is that many people have had gastric bypass surgery or surgeries that actually have affected their ability to produce stomach acid. So my goal now is to help you figure out how do we actually improve stomach acid. So that's our goal. That's what we're going to go over right now. And the only contraindications I would say for people is if you have H. pylori, or you're currently on a stomach acid blocker or, a medication, you won't want to be doing these. And the reason is that you need to work on those underlying root causes before we get to this. Now, much of this will help with the proton pump inhibitors, with the medications that you may be taking. But again, that's for you to work with your medical doctor on specifically. So I'm going to give you some very important ways to look at this. The first thing I do right out of the gates that almost anybody can do is drink a warm cup or hot cup of ginger tea with your meals, okay? And if you're making a smoothie and you want it to be a little bit more digestible, you can put some fresh ginger right in there and just blend up that fresh ginger if you want. How much? Well, about the size of like the top of your finger, right? So like a half an inch or so of ginger you can start with. You can always do more. So really, really nice. You can just grate it up. You can grate up fresh ginger and you can put it in some warm water. You could also strain fresh ginger in hot water. And another thing is you could simply do a organic ginger tea packet. I've talked about ginger tea many times on the podcast. You can check out the brands that I typically recommend, which are like traditional medicinals. That's one of my favorite. And if you can find a straight ginger by Organic India, that's a nice one as well. Okay, so ginger, hot ginger tea with a meal, one of those great digestive aids that's going to work for almost everyone except those people with higher levels of histamine. So this is how we learn about our bodies. Because here's the amazing thing. Okay, you have yourself a nice cup of hot ginger tea with your meal or after your meal to aid in digestion, and all of a sudden you get the worst heartburn of your life. You said, what is this? Well, most likely your heartburn is actually created by a histamine-based issue. And then what you can do is you can go over to stevencabral.com/podcast and get the free podcast on histamines and how to help with that. Okay, the next one is this. So you might do your ginger tea with the meal or after the meal. What can you do before the meal? Well, a great way before the meal, and you can also do it after the meal, it's not that you can't, is you have 1 tablespoon to maybe 2 maximum with 6 to 8 ounces of warm water. So 1 to 2 tablespoons of raw apple cider vinegar. Okay, it has to be the real apple cider vinegar, which means when you pick it up at the store and you look at the bottom, it has to have that fuzzy stuff that they call the mother. And what that is that shows that it's raw and unpasteurized. You need that. So what you do is you just shake that up, shake that bottle of raw apple cider vinegar up. I typically recommend the Bragg's brand. And again, you can go to the podcast. You can just look up Bragg's. You can look up apple cider vinegar. There's links to everything. And that has been shown to be helpful with acid reflux, reflux. It's been shown to be helpful with bloating. It's even been shown to be helpful with maintaining healthy levels of blood sugar as well. It's one of the things that we recommend inside of our Fatlocity system. One of the ways that we're able to help people lose weight all over the world is with that Fatlocity system. So raw apple cider vinegar, and again, we teach things like this. It's a great thing to do before a meal. Before every meal, absolutely can be great in improving overall digestion. Can also be done after a meal, depending on when you're able to get access to it. Okay, another big thing is this. You want to make sure that you chew your food. This is part of my mindfulness episode. It's only one of the tips, but this was a big one. It's chewing your food. People say 30 times, 50 times. It's not the number of times. Okay, that's always arbitrary. People say you need to drink 8 glasses of water per day. Well, yeah, I mean, it's a good safe bet. If you weigh, how much would that be? It'd be about 60 something ounces. Okay, so if you weighed about 115, 120 pounds, 8 ounces is the right amount. If you weigh more than that, well, you're going to need most likely more water per day. But it's a good start, right? 8 glasses of water, good start. Just like chewing your food 30 times. That's a good start. But how much do you need to chew it? Well, you need to chew it as much as you need to chew it in order to turn it into a paste, okay? So you wanted to chew it and almost liquefy it in your mouth. Why? Well, it mixes with your enzymes in your mouth, typically to break down mainly carbohydrates, but to break down the meat or to break down fish or to break down grains or vegetables, whatever you're eating. And here's why. If you don't turn it to a paste in your mouth, that means that whatever you swallow means more work for your stomach. So if you know that your stomach's prone to bloating, if you know you're prone to acid reflux, chew your food until you liquefy it in your mouth. If you do that, that alone will most likely help with the majority of your stomach-based issues, okay? Super important. Check out that tip. Also, decrease your processed foods. We talked about it before, but decrease your high sugary processed foods. And also, let's go over that first. Why? Because high processed foods can create inflammation in the stomach, which can also it can actually increase stomach acid production or decrease it and lead to acid reflux-based symptoms. So super important, eliminating cooked fats. So what I mean by that is fried food, okay? Eliminate that fried food, causing the same thing, much inflammation in the gut. The last part, in terms of foods, be careful with alcohol and coffee. These are two things that can lead to a lot of stomach acid reflux. They're triggers for some people, not for others. But just keep in mind, the day after drinking alcohol or so, your stomach feels a little uneasy, could be the alcohol. And also, if your stomach feels a little bit acid after drinking coffee, well, it might be a better idea to have that coffee after your breakfast, after you put food in it, rather than before, or simply moving over to something like a green tea instead. Okay, couple more. Probiotic. If you're not using the daily probiotic support, if you're not using something like the Clean Gut Probiotic, I absolutely do recommend that. And the reason is that these good bacteria are beneficial in promoting the right balance of bacteria and the right balance of inflammation and stomach acid. All right, super important. Now, how do we give you an immediate boost? Immediately, again, we talked about the ginger tea, we talked about the apple cider vinegar, we talked about the chewing of the food. What else you can do is this. 1 to 2 to maybe even 3 digestive enzymes at the start to your meal. Okay? Yes, you can take them 10 minutes before, but it's okay to take them at the beginning of your meal or even mid-meal if you need to. And if you still feel a little bloating after your meal, even do more digestive enzymes then. So in our practice, we typically just do 1 to 2 digestive enzymes at the start to a meal. It's called the daily digestive enzyme. You can find all of these things over at equilibriumnutrition.com or your favorite natural health retailer as well, as long as it has the right amount of nutrients in it. So the digestive enzymes, what they do is they actually provide the enzymes, proteases to break down protein, lipase to break down fat, cellulase to break down some vegetables, xylanase to break down fructans, amylase to break down starches. I could go on and on. But everything that ends in ase breaks down some type of food, whether it be protein, carbohydrates, and fats, and then the substrates of each one of those as well. So this allows your stomach to have to do less work. And as you're repairing your digestive system, that's hugely beneficial. So can't recommend enough using the daily digestive enzyme before each meal. Now, one that I've talked about digestive bitters before. Our daily digestive enzyme includes digestive bitters already in it, but you can check out my show on digestive bitters. It's, I believe, a Friday review where I talk about gentian root and a few others. Those have been used for many, many years in a lot of European cultures and all around the world. The last one that we use sparingly in my practice and we don't use it all the time, and here's why. It's called betaine HCl and pepsin. Now, what it does is actually gives you more stomach acid. Okay, so you take something called betaine HCl, and you can take it with or without pepsin. Pepsin is even stronger to break down proteins. Now, and you take that mid-meal, okay? Never the start of the meal, never at the very end of the meal. You take it mid-meal, okay? Because you want food on the bottom, you want food on top of it. But here's what it does. It actually lowers the pH. So it definitely helps you break down proteins to a greater degree, especially proteins. You wouldn't do it with a high-carb meal. You wouldn't do it with fruit. You wouldn't need to do it with a smoothie. You do it with a bigger protein-based meal that's harder to digest. Now, the reason I don't do it is if someone has stomach acid issues, high stomach acid, well, I'm adding more, so I don't do it in that case. If I know clinically they have low stomach acid, sure, I'll do that, and I can use it for anywhere from like 6 weeks to 12 weeks. And that'll be fine. But the other reason I don't always do it is because if the person has H. pylori, which we'll be learning about next week, a specific bacterial-based infection, I don't want to feed that bacteria. So that's typically why it's not my go-to right away in my practice, but I will use it if I've already run the bacterial stool test and I know that they don't have H. pylori and I know that they're not on any type of acid blocker. So then I might use it for a shorter period of time. But again, before I ever get there, I do all of the things I just shared with you, and then I'll use the betaine HCl and pepsin as needed. So this is the way, though. I mean, I'm giving you everything that we do in our clinical practice. Now, of course, if you have candida overgrowth, if you have parasites, if you have H. pylori, if you have SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, you have to take care of those, okay? You absolutely have to. You can run a lab test like the candida metabolic and vitamins test and the bacteria and parasite stool test and the IgG food sensitivity test. Those three will tell you what's going on inside of your digestive system. But if you're dealing mainly with stomach-based bloating and gas and burping or acid reflux, specifically within 30 minutes really of eating, the tips I gave you today are going to be a big part of moving your gut health forward. And then if the bloating and all of that comes a couple hours after eating, well, next week's episode will tackle that topic. So hopefully this has been helpful. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Excited about our new month of content over here on gut health and digestive-based health. Take care, everyone. And of course, if this show was helpful, please do feel free to share it with anyone you believe it could serve. I want to sincerely thank you for your support of this podcast. I couldn't do it without you, and I mean that. I truly do. I also want to make sure you knew that we now have multiple ways for you to find your answers to the most difficult health, wellness, weight loss, and anti-aging questions. You can find podcast-specific topics like thyroid, adrenal, hormones, sleep, digestion, Ayurveda, and many more at stevencabral.com/podcasts that will then link you to your favorite Apple, Spotify, and other podcast players. Plus, all new podcasts and weekly exclusive video content is being added to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Steven Cabral. And that's Steven with a PH. Head on over and subscribe so that you don't miss any of the exclusive content. Lastly, if you've ever found any of my podcasts or books to be helpful, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a review on iTunes or your favorite media player for the podcast. Rating and subscribing to the YouTube and podcast allow me to reach more and more people and help spread my mission of healing throughout the world. Thank you again for being a part of this movement.